The old farmhouse had been abandoned for decades. Locals in the small, rural town whispered of dark events that had taken place there, but few could recall specifics. It was just understood the place was cursed. When Jacob and his family moved into the farmhouse, they scoffed at the rumors. They needed a fresh start, and the house was cheap. It was perfect for them, or so they thought. On the first night, Jacob's youngest daughter, Lily, found an old, dusty doll in the attic. It was porcelain, with glassy blue eyes that seemed to follow her every movement. She immediately took a liking to it, carrying it everywhere. Strange things began to happen. Doors that were firmly shut would swing open on their own. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways. The family's dog, Max, refused to go near the attic, growling and barking at something only he could see. Jacob dismissed it all as their imaginations running wild in an old house. But then, Lily began talking to someone. At first, Jacob and his wife thought she had an imaginary friend. That was until they heard the whispers, too, cold, soft voices seeping through the walls. One night, Jacob awoke to find Lily standing at the foot of his bed, the doll clutched in her arms. Her eyes were wide, but unseeing, as if she were in a trance. "She wants to play," Lily whispered. "She's lonely." A chill ran down Jacob's spine. He took the doll from her, intending to get rid of it in the morning. But as soon as it left Lily's grasp, she screamed, a piercing, inhuman sound that echoed through the house. Max howled, and the lights flickered. Desperate to end the nightmare, Jacob raced to the backyard with the doll and an old shovel. He dug frantically, burying the doll deep in the earth. As he covered it, the ground beneath him began to tremble. He fell back, watching in horror as skeletal hands clawed their way out of the dirt, reaching for him. Jacob scrambled back to the house, slamming the door behind him, but the nightmare wasn't over. The whispers grew louder, the footsteps more insistent. That night, Jacob's wife, Emily, found Lily standing at the attic door, her eyes vacant. "She's back," Lily said in a voice not her own, "and she's angry." The family fled the house that night, never to return. The farmhouse stands empty again, a silent sentinel to the horrors it holds. And in the backyard, deep beneath the earth, the doll waits, its glassy blue eyes ever watchful, ever hungry for new souls to claim. Years had passed since Jacob and his family fled the cursed farmhouse. The townsfolk had all but forgotten the events, and new families had moved into the area, unaware of the horrors that once lurked there. One crisp autumn day, a young couple, Mark and Sarah, purchased the farmhouse, drawn to its rustic charm and secluded location. They planned to restore it to its former glory, oblivious to the house's dark history. On their first night, Sarah explored the attic. Among the cobwebs and forgotten relics, she discovered an old, tattered journal. It was filled with frantic, barely legible entries detailing strange occurrences and inexplicable phenomena. The final entry was dated the night Jacob and his family fled, abruptly ending mid-sentence. Curiosity piqued, Sarah spent her days reading through the journal, feeling a growing sense of unease. She mentioned it to Mark, but he dismissed it as old folklore and the ramblings of previous owners. A week into their stay, Sarah found herself drawn to the backyard. She felt a strange compulsion to dig in a particular spot, the ground oddly soft despite the autumn chill. To her shock, she unearthed an old porcelain doll, its blue eyes still eerily vibrant. Sarah brought the doll inside, and almost immediately, strange things began to happen. Doors creaked open on their own, shadows moved in the corners of their eyes, and the temperature plummeted at random intervals. At night, Sarah would awaken to hear faint whispers, too soft to understand, but filled with malevolent intent. One evening, as Sarah was preparing dinner, she heard Mark's voice calling from the attic. Confused, she ascended the creaky stairs, finding Mark standing motionless, staring at the empty corner of the attic. "She's here," he whispered, his voice distant and hollow. "She never left." Mark's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He began talking to the doll, claiming it spoke back to him. Sarah, terrified, tried to throw the doll away, but every time she did, it reappeared in the house, always in a more prominent location. Desperate, Sarah reached out to the town's historian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Thompson knew the farmhouse's dark history and recounted the tragic tale of a little girl named Abigail who had lived there centuries ago. Abigail had been lonely and neglected, finding solace in her doll until a tragic accident took her life. Ever since, her spirit had been bound to the doll, seeking company, but bringing only despair and madness to those who found it. Determined to break the curse, Sarah and Mrs. Thompson devised a plan. They would burn the doll, hoping to release Abigail's spirit and end the haunting. They gathered in the backyard at midnight, the air thick with tension. As the flames consumed the doll, an otherworldly scream pierced the night, shaking the ground and extinguishing the fire. For a moment, all was silent. Then, from the shadows, a spectral figure emerged. A little girl with hollow eyes and an anguished expression. "Why?" she whispered, her voice echoing with sorrow. "Why won't you play with me?" Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, her voice gentle yet firm. "Abigail, it's time to rest. You've suffered long enough." The ghostly figure hesitated, then slowly faded, her mournful gaze lingering on Sarah. The air grew still, and an overwhelming sense of peace washed over the yard. The house remained quiet after that night, the malevolent presence seemingly gone. Mark and Sarah continued their restoration, their lives gradually returning to normal, but they always kept a wary eye on the attic, never forgetting the horrors they had faced. And deep beneath the earth, in a spot now covered by grass and flowers, a faint whisper lingered, waiting for the day it would be heard again. Years had passed since Mark and Sarah had confronted the malevolent spirit of Abigail. They continued their lives, believing the nightmare had finally ended. The farmhouse, now beautifully restored, was their sanctuary. They even welcomed a baby girl, Emily, into their lives, bringing new joy to the old house. One cold winter evening, as snow blanketed the ground, Sarah was tucking Emily into her crib when she noticed something odd. In the corner of the nursery, half hidden beneath a pile of old toys, was the porcelain doll. Its glassy blue eyes seemed to sparkle with a malevolent glint. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had destroyed this doll, she was sure of it. Fear surged through her, but she forced herself to remain calm. She picked up the doll, intending to take it far away this time, maybe even destroy it anew. As she turned to leave the room, Emily began to cry, a plaintive wail that sent chills down Sarah's spine. The air grew colder, and the room darkened as if a shadow had passed over the house. Downstairs, Mark was working on the fireplace. He heard Sarah's hurried footsteps and Emily's cries. He rushed up to find Sarah standing in the nursery, clutching the doll, her face pale with terror. "It's back," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark took the doll from her, intending to burn it in the fireplace. As he descended the stairs, the house seemed to groan, the very walls trembling. He threw the doll into the fire, watching as the flames licked at its porcelain surface. But instead of melting, the doll's eyes glowed brighter, and an unearthly scream filled the room, reverberating through the entire house. Suddenly, the fire exploded outward, knocking Mark back. Shadows writhed and twisted, forming the shape of a young girl, Abigail. Her hollow eyes bore into Mark and Sarah, her voice echoing with a blend of sorrow and rage. "You thought you could get rid of me," she hissed. "You thought you could escape." The room grew icy cold, frost creeping up the walls. Emily's cries turned to desperate wails. Sarah ran to her daughter, but an invisible force slammed the nursery door shut. She pounded on it, screaming for Mark, but her voice was drowned out by Abigail's eerie laughter. Mark stumbled to his feet, grabbing an iron poker from the hearth. He swung it at Abigail, but it passed through her form, doing nothing to dispel the specter. Abigail's laughter grew louder, more mocking. "You can't fight me," she taunted. "This house is mine. Your souls are mine." In the nursery, Sarah held Emily close, whispering comforting words as the temperature continued to drop. The windows frosted over, and a sense of dread filled the room. Suddenly, the doll appeared in the crib beside Emily, untouched by the fire, its eyes gleaming with malevolent life. Sarah screamed, a primal, desperate sound. She grabbed the doll, intending to hurl it out the window, but Abigail's spirit enveloped her, cold hands pressing into her shoulders. "Stay with me," the ghost whispered. "Play with me." Mark, hearing Sarah's scream, raced upstairs. He threw open the nursery door, but it was too late. Sarah stood frozen, eyes wide with terror, the doll in her hands. Emily's cries had stopped, replaced by a haunting silence. The room was filled with a suffocating cold, and Abigail's spectral form hovered over them, her laughter ringing in Mark's ears. In a final act of desperation, Mark lunged at the doll, ripping it from Sarah's grasp. But as he did, a force like a hurricane threw him back against the wall, pinning him there. Abigail turned her gaze to him, her eyes now dark voids. "You will all stay with me," she intoned, "forever." The house seemed to close in on itself, walls warping and shadows deepening. Mark and Sarah's screams mingled with Abigail's laughter, a cacophony of horror that echoed through the empty halls. The next morning, the farmhouse stood silent, shrouded in an eerie calm. Snow covered the ground, undisturbed. Inside, the rooms were empty, save for a single dusty porcelain doll sitting in the nursery, its glassy blue eyes watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting family to arrive.